We merged. We were the better run company, but we had more debt on our balance sheet. So the other management team took over. I stayed about 6 months through integration and got out, but kept a sliver of the equity, and the whole thing ended up being sold to Blackstone for $1.6 billion, and I had a sliver of that.
Mark Fikse spent a 25-year career leading two large-scale roll-ups, each close to $1 billion in revenue. Mark has been successfully acquiring and integrating companies to drive growth for years. His expertise in operational scaling, leadership, and post-acquisition integration makes him a top authority in home building services.
Way back in the 90s, I was with McKinsey and Company, a big strategy consulting firm. And so I would work on Fortune 500 strategy efforts and things. And some of that included very detailed M&A work. I ended up focusing in on finance in a number of scenarios. Have you guys ever read the book Valuation? There's a white book called Valuation. It's written by Tom Copeland and Tim Kohler. And in corporate America, private equity, it's kind of one of the Bibles of kind of how to value a company and do that. And so that was being written by those gentlemen at McKinsey and Company. And I worked with those gentlemen on a variety of studies, from, valuing a subsidiary of Anheuser-Busch that was a bakery subsidiary that they were selling, to working on the sales of a retailer, and looking at merging pharmaceutical distribution companies together. So a variety of different types of things where we were advising Fortune 500 companies on, either selling or buying and whatnot, right? Then I entered a period where I was the vice president of strategy for the Home Depot. And so that included laying the groundwork for acquisitions that we did. So, for example, when we entered into Mexico, we looked at, the number one, number two, and number three players in Mexico, and went through a process where we first acquired the number three player, then acquired the number two player, and then got the number one player to capitulate. And in turn, we essentially bought and the number three player was like 4 stores, right? So we bought the top 3 players in Mexico, blocked Lowe's from ever going there. They tried, failed, right? And so they've never gone. And Home Depot today has, 150 big box stores in Mexico, and there is no second player, right? And so we leveraged this strategy of kind of first mover advantage, leveraging our balance sheet to go into Mexico and kind of win in Mexico. We also bought other ancillary companies, some of which you've never heard of. We bought a company called Your Other Warehouse, which was a kind of a specialty plumbing distributor, and that turned into the back end, a lot of back end supply chain efforts for Home Depot. So they were supplying actually specialty plumbing to Lowe's, and so when we bought them, we kind of cut Lowe's off at the knee for specialty plumbing, and bought this company and then expanded it from there and offered different products through that. And that still is a big piece of the back end of Home Depot. So if you go to plumbing.com and buy a faucet on plumbing.com, nobody knows, but that's owned by Home Depot, and it's all part of, Your Other Warehouse and acquisition I led 20 some years ago.
Wow.
Then we got into a space within Home Depot that was serving home builders, and we went after design center players that were really historically out of the flooring contractor space, and they provided design center services and turnkey installation services in flooring, cabinets, and countertops to big home builders. So we bought actually 3 companies on the same day, closed them, and I ended up becoming president of that business unit. So immediately moved into running about a $300 million P&L, and then grew that over the course of the next several years to about $800 million in revenue through organic growth and more acquisitions, another 5 or 6 bolt-on acquisitions to that platform. Then after that time frame at Home Depot, I entered kind of a third phase of M&A, and I went to work for a private equity fund, a publicly traded BDC at the time. And my specialty was they had a consumer products guy, they had a manufacturing guy, and I got everything else, which was essentially B2B services. Anything tied to B2B services kind of fell into my lap. And so I got involved in a lot of different looks at private equity deals, got very accustomed to the whole private equity lingo and debt structures and boards. And I ended up sitting on, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 boards in middle market private equity, everything from a flight training academy to a dental roll up to Amco transmissions and a drug testing laboratory, addiction recovery centers, a mixture of different types of entities, electrical contractor, you name it. And so got involved there for a number of years. And then after that, I ended up going back to the same space that I had rolled up. Home Depot, after I left, completely screwed up the business. The Great Recession hit, and a bunch of the guys that I bought started over after their non-competes ran out. And I had stayed friends with them. And so I started with that group as platform acquisition, and I raised private equity, and I became CEO of a private equity backed roll up that we, again, did another 10 or 11 acquisitions, grew it to about an $800 million platform, and then merged that into, actually sold it to another private equity fund, sold it to Platinum Equity on the West Coast. And then about after a year with Platinum, I went to them and I said, we need to merge with our largest competitor in order to figure out an exit. So we merged. We were the better run company, but we had more debt on our balance sheet. So the other management team took over. So I stayed about 6 months through integration, which was like 5.9 months too long, and got out, but kept a sliver of the equity, and the whole thing ended up being sold to Blackstone for $1.6 billion, and I had a sliver of that. So that worked out for me. So then and today I have a small private lending fund that I established, but I really view it as, hey, it's just the next phase. And, at some point I've built it that I can sell it someday if I want to, right? And tried to build it at scale, but did that with my own money, and I own it 100%. And I'm also lead director on a board for a company that does stone and tile import and distribution, and is backed by Baupost and Company. And so I'm lead director on that company as well. So kind of 5 phases of my life, of my career, tied to mergers and acquisitions. All told, I've, raised, well north of $1 billion worth of capital, been involved in probably 100 deals. And I would say, 25 of those I had to eat my own cooking because they ended up reporting to me. And I had to do the M&A work and decide on it. And some of those went really well, and some of them turned out to be mistakes, right, that I lived with, right, in terms of that process. So always learning as you go through it. And today I'm kind of at the tail end of my career, kind of more winding things down and trying to figure out how to, take more time, spend it with my wife, who we've been married for 34 years. And hopefully there'll be grandkids on the way at some point soon too.
Nice. So. That's awesome. So from your vantage point, having gone through this whole kind of experience, what is the anatomy of a good deal in M&A?
Yeah. I mean, it all starts with strategy, right? Like what, where is it? What's your goal? What are you trying to figure out, and make sure that you, you don't get buck fever. Does everybody know what buck fever is?
No.
Buck fever is when a deer hunter goes into the woods, right? And it's deer hunting season, and they're looking around, and they're there to hunt deer, and they shoot at anything that moves, right? And including human beings, right? And that's the biggest problem in M&A. People get buck fever, and they shoot after things when they shouldn't be shooting at all, right?
Yes.
And so I think starting with, what is it you're actually trying to accomplish? Is this the right industry, right, that you're going in? Do you really understand the structure of the industry, the conduct of the players, and therefore the performance, right? And a lot of people end up kind of chasing after it. I mean, I talked to a young guy the other day. He's like, "Oh, I like working out, so I want to go acquire a, you know, uh, gym franchise and not a little small one that's low overhead, like a 30,000 square foot thing." Right. And I'm just kind of going, do you know what the failure rate is in that industry? It's horrendous, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrendous. And so what is it you're trying to accomplish?
So, and to give context from our group, majority of the guys, either one or two strategies. Either they're going after a platform within home services or B2B services. Those are probably the main two, angles. And then, or a few of the guys are added on, so to existing platforms that they already have.
Yeah.
So if you come at it from like the, home services category, what's the anatomy of a good deal in the home service
Well,
category?
if you're already in the space and
Yeah.
you already have domain knowledge, doing an add-on is like the absolute, best thing, right? I mean, you're just leveraging your platform, making sure that you do it, but those are oftentimes the best deals, right? The challenge is that if you've never done M&A before, sometimes you stub your toe because this guy says he's going to stay with you and do this and all those things. And then it's like, no, he's checked out. Right. And so I would say that I've probably, all the acquisitions that I've done probably had, um, 70 operators, right? Where some of them were owned by 3 and 4 people. So probably negotiate with 70 operators. I would say of that, about a third didn't come with they wanted out. That's fine, right? About 2/3 came. In that case, I would say there's a 65% failure rate, right? That only 1/3 of the guys that say they want to do it are good players that will join. So you have to go in kind of going, this person probably isn't the guy, right?
Mm.
And make sure you negotiate around that and understand what the exit is for that individual and what the replacement is for that individual if they're not staying, because you have to make sure you get that right. And does that person own the customers, right? Because if that person owns the customers and they exit, now you're in trouble. What you've paid for, right? And so what is it that you're actually buying? Are you buying, a customer list that you can build relationships with, or there's a call center set up, et cetera, right? I love the recurring revenue of, security alarm companies and, plumbing maintenance and HVAC maintenance, stuff like that. But when you're talking about a contractor who, is in commercial flooring, I don't like that, right? Because that guy owns the relationships with 5 or 6 big customers, and when he leaves, you're toast, right?
Yeah.
Type of thing. And so I think it just depends on that.
So the majority of deals that you did, you retained the owner as an employee for a while?
Yeah, we retained a number of them, or we would retain them on a part-time basis, but they would have a number 2 player or something like that. A lot of them we would do that. Now, these were, most of these were deals where we were acquiring, $3 to $5 million or more of EBITDA in each deal, right? Occasionally there was a small bolt-on where we were just like bolting it into another player we had already acquired, in which case we wouldn't keep the management who didn't care, right? We were just kind of taking market share, but we had a good management team. But it all depends on the people, right?
Yeah. So what was your so let's go back. So what was your sourcing strategy for these deals?
Well, this turned out to be a niche space, and so across the industry, I mean, literally, once we started playing it and acquiring a few players, the other players knew other players, and so I kind of had the list of here's the top 150 players in the country, and I knew who they were, and I could basically get an introduction through myself or through a vendor or whatever and make the call, right? And so I would court, but some of that courtship was a long time running, right? There was a gentleman that I tried to buy in when I was at Home Depot. I tried to buy him in 2005. Okay. I didn't buy him then, but I bought him in 2015.
Uh,
Right. But we knew each other because I tried to buy him in 2005. And when I came back to do it again 10 years later, we did the deal. Right. So, it can go a long time.
so you're constantly, you're just going cold, or you going through, it's not like going through brokers, or you're putting introductions through.
A couple of players came to us through bankers because, they were big enough that they hired a banker and then they got brought to us. Right.
Yeah.
But a bunch of them were proprietary deals where I got a warm introduction from somebody on our team, or I cold called the person directly, or a vendor introduced me, I've met them at the trade shows, etc.
Okay. How big was your team?
My team, I had 2,200 employees at my last go around.
No, like just for the M&A side.
Oh, usually, I had a 3-person well, first of all, when I was running the strategy group at Home Depot, I had 20 to 25 people in that group. Only 2 or 3 were involved in acquisitions at any point in time. The others were all involved in just kind of internal corporate strategy stuff that we were doing for the stores, right? And then we partnered up with the director of business valuation at the time when I was there. He is today the CEO of Home Depot. Right?
Oh, wow.
I partnered up with him a lot. And then, when I was running the business unit inside Home Depot, I think I had a 3-person M&A team, and they would handle M&A and then some of the real estate too, because that was all negotiations as part of it. And then when I was doing the private equity backed roll up, I just had a 1-man, BD guy working for me, but then the private equity guys would help too, right? Because that's what they did. And so I would have that running.
Got it. And and then what was kind of your approach? Now you identify the target that you're interested in. They are thinking about selling. What was your approach with that seller? How do you kind of approach them? How do you evaluate them? What was yours?
Yeah, I mean, it always starts with a relationship. So my approach was get my butt on an airplane and go out and buy the guy dinner, right? Develop a relationship. Always meet at the trade show. Always call the guy. Hey, would you be interested? No, I'm not interested. Okay, call him back in 6 months. Hey, you're interested, right? Okay, not interested, but he's at the trade show. Let's grab a beer together, right? I mean, I just had a constant, as I was doing that and leading that, I had open, list of 50 M&A candidates, and I had a lot of the owners, I had their cell phones and their emails, and I'd check in with them, and I'd meet them at the trade show, meet them at the builder show, whatever. If I was in town, I'd say, hey, can we grab a drink, right? And just keep the relationship warm so that it was there. Or if it was owned by a private equity, I'd be, have a relationship there, right? And keep the dialogue going, and eventually it would turn out to, hey, let's sign an NDA and let's start down the path. And then, hey, let's get an initial data request and see what we're looking at and put an indication of interest out and see if you can get it, signed under an exclusive LOI, and then go through diligence, right?
Got it. And can you kind of share some stories of like some deals where you went into that process and decided it didn't work out? So either from your side or from the seller side.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a great company in Florida. I was very close. I had it under LOI, and the seller just like, life is good. I don't need to do this. I got a guy running this thing, and I don't have to sell. And so he didn't. And I think at the time he was doing probably $5 million of EBITDA. and he chose not to sell. And today he is barely working at all, playing golf with his customers, and the thing just prints like 12 plus million of EBITDA a year for him. And he has no debt. He's a single owner, and his life is good. And even 10 years later, he never sold. So it works for him. Didn't work for me, but oh well. So you get that and you see what happens. And then other deals where you look at it and you kind of go, hey, this just doesn't fit, right? We've looked at it and I can't get the numbers to work, or, the customer concentration is wrong. Or there's just not enough there to want to be able to do the deal, right? And so, you got to learn to when to walk away from them and just say, hey, I looked at it, I looked at a good deal in Atlanta and it's like, no, I just can't get there. The numbers don't work. And the management team's leaving, and what am I buying? I'm just buying a shell. And so it's just not worth it.
Yeah. Curious, you have a question?
I was just wondering on the customer concentration, did you have numbers, like a target that you set for that where, hey, this is just too high? Or was it a deal by deal basis?
Yeah, it's more deal by deal, right? Right. In terms of, hey, some guys were, hey, this is 40% customer concentration. That's just too much, right? Other guys are like, hey, that top 5 customers are 60%, but look at who they are and look at how long they've had them. It's like, okay, you can take the risk, right? And so I think it's all contextual based upon, kind of what you're buying, right? And so, for example, we bought a company in Phoenix, right? And Phoenix is a very concentrated home building market. So top customers were, Toll and Taylor Morrison and Pulte and Lennar, et cetera. And, those customers represented probably 60% of the top 5 probably represented 60% of the revenue mix, right? But they'd had those customers and relationships for, a decade. And so it's like, yeah, they're not going anywhere and it's consistent. So let's go do it. But in another market, the home builder fragmentation is, much more significant. And so you don't have as much concentration.
So, but in your space, Mark, you were rolling up, or you're tucking these companies in. So why would you care about concentration in that case? Because you're bringing a smaller into a bigger entity.
Yeah, I mean, you are, but you're still. I mean, when you're running a private equity backed roll up, right? The whole deal is you got to keep the EBITDA growth going, right? Yeah. Because the valuation becomes, in terms of your leverage metrics, your the next deal, how much equity you're giving out to the next acquired candidate, et cetera. You got to keep it going. And so what you don't want to do is, stub your toe on acquisition number 4 that's got high customer concentration and have your EBITDA walk backwards, right? Because you're levered, right? Yeah. And if you're levered at 3 times EBITDA or 3.5 times EBITDA and you stub your toe, that leverage jumps to 4.5 pretty quickly, and now you're looking at either a capital call or tripping debt covenants, et cetera. So you have to be. I looked at a number of deals that would have been great strategic deals that were, man, what a strategic deal. Didn't make any sense whatsoever because we would be basically buying assets on the cheap, and long term we'd be buying a platform for growth, but we weren't getting any EBITDA out of the deal now. And so you just couldn't do the deal because the story gets wrecked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too tight. So concentration, what are some of the things are like your walkaways?
Well, I mean, walkaways, integrity and risk. I mean, the challenge is a lot of places, you guys know, is, can you even audit the books, right? What's actually going on? And so we had to walk away from deals that, hey, the books are so bad, right? That there's just no integrity, and tell them, hey, go clean up your accounting, go get an accountant, an audit firm to help you and go through this and figure this out going forward. But we just, it's such a mess right now from a small company standpoint. If you guys are looking at really small deals, those are the ones you can buy for 2 times EBITDA. You just have to rebuild the cash, right? You need to tie out the cash to the balance sheet. The challenge that on the small side, and I learned this long time ago when I was I did a stint 20, I don't know, gosh, I'm trying to think, 25 years ago. I did 18 months in an auto collision roll-up business, right?
Yeah.
And we would buy auto body stores, right? And we would kind of almost completely ignore the income statement. And we would sit down and we would tie out the balance sheets to the bank statements and the cash and try to rebuild the income statement to see if it made sense, because you had to tie it back to the cash.
Yeah.
And, you'd find stuff like, okay, well, what's this cash deposit? Well, that was for the repair I did on the Rolls Royce. Well, where is that in the income statement? Well, that was a cash deal. It's like, oh my goodness, right? It was a stolen Rolls Royce the guy was fixing, so you got to walk away from the deal, right?
Yeah.
Those types of things, you have to tie it out. So I would just encourage you, if you're going really small, ignore the income statement and go right after the balance sheet and the cash.
What other walkaways? So in terms of the team itself, we talked about concentration of the clients. We talked about the cash, the financials. Yeah, but how about the team, and how do you underwrite the team itself?
That's $64,000 question right there, right? I've used everything from personality assessments, from HR interviews, executive interviews, etc., reference checks, etc. At some point, you're buying entrepreneurs, right? And if you can get a sense for their integrity, number one, right, and that's most important. And number two is, how stuck in their ways are they, right? Because if they can't adapt and they're just stuck in their ways as an entrepreneur, those are the ones that actually cause more problems. The guys that can't change and always kind of go, it's my way or the highway, every time, that ends up to be a brick wall, right? Every time. And it ends up to be nasty, right? In terms of terminating guys, paying out severance, negotiating, deals, spending money on attorneys. Those are the disasters. So the guy that is absolutely kind of a his way, a highway autocrat, leave them, don't take them on the team. Figure out how to close the deal. They're not an employee. You hire them on a part-time consulting basis as needed for 90 days to help you as needed, but don't let them have control. Yeah. And usually you find out like day number 2 that most of the employees hate them anyway.
That's funny. And this part right here, was that from a private equity lens or the Home Depot lens?
Everything.
Okay.
I've seen it in private equity deals. I've seen it in Home Depot deals. You name it, is all about, do the employees love this person, right?
Yeah.
And will they run through a brick wall for them, right? Type of thing. And do they have that, or is this person just a me? It's all about them, and it's about their ego. And you get after that, and if it's about them, acquire the company and say, hey, you don't have a succession plan in place. This company's only worth 2.5 times EBITDA. I'm paying you. You walk away, right?
Yeah.
And get them out sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So these guys are resistant to changes. What kind of changes were you guys implementing right away?
I mean, I always go into every acquisition. I would get in rooms with employees, when we announce deals, either pre-close or post-close or whatever, announce deals. And I would literally tell everybody, they would say, what's going to change? And I would say, everything is going to change. Okay. I wouldn't hide it. I wouldn't sugarcoat it. I'd say, have you guys changed over, because usually I was buying companies that were on a growth trajectory of some kind, right?
Yeah.
And I would ask them, have you guys changed every year for the last 10 years? And they'd say, yeah. Okay. So what you're telling me is, I'm buying a company that is used to changing, in order to succeed in the marketplace. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Okay. So why would I quit changing every year, every quarter, every month, every week? If that's what you've been doing for 10 years in order to be successful, why would we ever stop changing? We're going to change. We're going to make things, we're going to change everything, go forward. Now, can your team stay the same? Yeah. If you're performing, it's great. Yeah. Are our customers going to stay the same? Yeah, it's great. Are we going to keep growing? Yeah, that's great. But everything's going to change, right? Because nothing stands still in time, and people that aren't changing are dying. And I would just tell them that from the start.
That's awesome. And what's your next step? You're doing one-on-ones with the top management, and then going down the line, or what was your focus, after that first announcement?
Every deal has to have its own communication plan, right? And so we would have, literally, we would, got used to building a communication plan that would, we would take each audience, right? Say, what's the objective? What's the message? What's the median? And we would go through. Okay. And so we might have a cascading plan, especially when you're at scale in a public, company. You're hiring either an internal, external PR person in order to, write the press release to go through that. The board I'm involved. We just did a leadership change and some announcements, and we hired a third party PR firm to help us write the external and internal talking points so that everybody from the board to the CEO were on the same page, right?
Oh, wow.
To go through that. And so I think, there's lots of different templates out on the internet for a communication plan, but you've got to, what's your executive plan? What are you communicating to the vendors? What are you communicating to the customers? What are you communicating to the manager level employees, right? Are you taking them out for dinner and doing something? What about the frontline employees? What about the contractors?
Yeah.
How does it all work and flow through? What are you releasing to the marketplace, et cetera? And again, it's just, who's the audience? What's the objective you're trying to get across? What are the talking points, right? And what's the medium, whether it's verbal, written, press release, emails, you name it. And then timing, right? Because there would be we would, especially in a public company, you script it out by the minute, right? Because if you have to announce, you'll announce to employees after the market closes one day and run through, we would have dinners and meetings, and then we would show up in the warehouse at 7:00 in the morning and announce, and the press release has to go out at, kind of 9 a.m. before the stock market opens, right?
Oh, wow.
And so you have to time the entire communication plan around, the timing of the press release to comply with the SEC requirements.
How about the clients?
Yeah, no, same thing. Some of the clients, it's like, okay, these 5 clients got the call the day before. They got personal calls from the acquired CEO, right? And these guys could, it would be good with an email. This guy needed a golf on Saturday before the deal got done, whatever it was, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Andrew, you had a question?
Mark, this is incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your own experience with us. This is, I can't remember the last time I took this many notes. So, Mark, my question for you is really, it's around culture, and I kind of want to just hear what you have to say about culture in general. But the question that comes to mind for me is how much of the culture from the acquiring company do you try to keep, assuming there's a good culture there? How much do you try to impose on the company that's new that to be beneficial in the long term?
Yeah, I'm a huge culture guy, right? Just it really, really important. And so I would try to keep the best of some cultures, right? Of some things, but I would also build on it. I am big on decentralized structures. I'm big on servant leadership. I love training and developing leaders. I would get my top 100 leaders together for 2.5 days every year, and we go through, everything from presentation to training of them on certain topics. Then break out into small groups and do different exercises in small groups, but just really big on things. I would bring in speakers, right? So depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, right? But oftentimes focused on things that tie in. So I would bring in military speakers when at the same time we go read, It's Your Ship, right? One of my favorite books on culture, basically culture by Admiral Aberhoff, right? Or I'd bring in, different authors, a couple that I use regularly. And then I had a consultant that is a great friend of mine that was a leadership coach. And I had him on retainer coaching my top 50 executives every year. And that really helped me continue to build culture by investing in them through having a leadership coach for all of them.
That's awesome. So going back to that integration piece, recently Home Depot bought this large roll-up SRS. Yeah, and then we looked at SRS, and I'm like, it's amazing. It's like 115 transactions in one.
Yeah, I modeled SRS is really cool. SRS is one of those companies in the building materials distribution space that I actually modeled some of what I did at ILG. That and there's another company owned by a family office out of two companies owned by a family office out of Chicago. One's called Consolidated Electric, and one is called Hajoka. And one's plumbing, one's electric, and they're owned by the Keith Colburn and family, and they run some really interesting decentralized businesses that allow a lot of autonomy from the branch managers. And I modeled ILG. I just had this discussion with a buddy of mine who left my company, ILG, and went off and started his own company again. And he said that, the old company, the leaders that took over after I left just screwed the culture up, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is they kind of went to this really corporate manifesto of, hey, you got to set your budget higher, and then we pay you against the budget, and it just becomes an arm wrestling and argument, right?
Yeah.
And I always instituted part of the success was a really open and honest discussion with my guys, but they never got paid relative to budget. They got paid to value creation, right?
Yeah.
And whether you want to call it, EVA, economic value added. Now we had low, I could control CapEx from centrally. And if they hit their working capital targets, where I'd put some budgets in for working capital targets on DSOs and DIOs and, things like that, DPOs. And I would pay them some on that, but basically I would pay them on EBITDA, right? And so they would get a share of EBITDA above a threshold, and the more money they made, the more money the company made, the more money they made, right? And it was never tied to budget.
Yeah.
And so that they would make the right investments this year, because if they didn't make the right investments this year, they knew they wouldn't make good money next year and the next year, et cetera, right? And so they would stay in position a long time. And those are the companies that are doing really well. And those are the things that you can do in your business that can make it succeed without giving equity. You don't have to give a lot of equity, but you can keep your guys humping and doing business, right? I mean, my lead guy in Skybeam Capital makes a very good money, and he just makes a base salary and a straight percentage of the profit every month.
Wow.
And he gets a big bonus every month. So he works his butt off every month, and he gets a big check every month, and it's never against budget. It's just, how do we do this month? You're sharing in the success.
Nice. So the SRS acquisitions, what are those deals structured like? Is that a 49-51 acquisition, 60-40 type acquisition?
It's a full blown. It'll be so Home Depot in this case. It's a large enough acquisition. Home Depot will create its own separate subsidiary, and leave it as a subsidiary. It may be depending on the situation. Like they've got HD Supply, which is basically an MRO company. They've got that in completely separate subsidiary with its own board because it's actually a government contractor and they don't want to taint the Orange Box stores with being a government contractor. So they've absolutely carved it off. This will be pretty separate. They've learned their lesson when Home Depot has tried to, in the past, back when I was there 20 years ago, when they swallowed companies, they often put a big orange hug around it and they killed the company, which is exactly what happened to the business I was running after I left. Is I had been at Home Depot a while, and I knew the senior officers, and I knew how to resist some of the hugs from HR and legal and things like that. After I left, they never resisted, and it just went downhill, right? And they just kind of, I'll give you a story. There's one guy, after I left, I still know to this day, right? He was like a golfing machine, right? The guy would play golf twice a week. He was really good. And he had relationships up and down the East Coast with home builders, right? And so he was being paid really well. Like, this is 20 years ago, but he was making, $400,000. Well, after I left, the woman they put in charge, they took him out for dinner and said, well, you make more money than a store manager at Home Depot. This doesn't make sense. We're going to cut your pay, right? Okay. So he resigned like a week later, right?
Yeah.
Joined Pulte Homes as a head of operations or something for a year while his non-compete ran out. A year after his non-compete runs out, he joins another tile install company. And over the course of the next, 3 or 4 years, destroys what was left at that Home Depot by taking half the people and all the sales reps and all the customers. And then he turns around and sells that business later and he makes $20 million, right? Because Home Depot gave him the big orange hug, thought he was making too much, and he just ate Home Depot's lunch, destroyed that decision by Home Depot to give him that hug, cost him, $100 million of shareholder value and destroyed the entity, right? So
That's crazy.
What do you do?
Yeah. But SRS itself, what were the deal structures that they were doing on their acquisitions?
So SRS grew up as a roofing company, roofing distribution, right? And now they've gotten into some of the landscaping and pool supplies, a little bit through landscaping, but basically grew up as acquiring a small roofing contractor, kept the local brand name and local management in place, putting the systems in behind it, and built it up. And the guy that runs runs SRS is a great guy. He runs a great culture, very people focused, etc. But he would buy small companies, give them, better buying, better, tools, but would kind of leave them alone, which there's pros and cons of all the brands and everything else, right?
Yeah, sure.
My buddy that runs Site One Landscape Supply, he's like changing the brand name, right? But they're publicly held, right? So, but they kept at it, and they just had this huge marketplace. What's nice about SRS is most of the volume is driven by re-roofing, which is a pretty steady business. That re-roof is, people always need new roofs, and the roofs are aging, et cetera. And so it's out there. And so that's what they do. And it was just kind of lots and lots and lots of small acquisitions. Now the acquisition machine, I think, is running out, which is why they started having to go into landscape supply and pool supply and do those types of things, because they're kind of running out there. And that whole products distribution space is consolidated in a massive extent compared to where it was 20, 25 years ago. Right?
Yeah. Well,
et cetera.
I think, what's his name? Brad Jacobs doesn't think so. He just came into to play in that game.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the guy, XPO, and he did United Rentals and United the Waste. He sold it to Waste Management. So he's kind of like, he put in $1 billion to do a large roll up.
Yeah, we'll see.
Construction materials.
Yeah, we'll see what he does. But
Yeah, so it's interesting how this space is getting a lot of attention lately. That's why kind of like back to back there were a lot of activity. So what you said, SRS was buying the whole company, not just part of that company, and then keeping the management in place.
They were generally buying small operators. They might keep management in place depending on management would stay or not. I'm sure they would change them out. They'd retire. I'm sure for a long time we kept a lot of managers in place.
Yeah.
But they've been at it for so long. Those guys are retiring, and then the assistant manager gets promoted, et cetera. They run it's a pretty, it's a large business, but yet each individual operation isn't that big, which kind of makes it nice, right?
Got it. And then in your acquisition, once you do the integrations, what are your like 1, 2, 3 kind of, items in terms of like integrating into the larger?
It was never 1, 2, 3. We had really, really detailed integration plans, right? I mean, we would go through everything from legal to treasury management to benefits to branding to, HR systems to, IT systems, financial and accounting. We'd have to go through. So we had, everybody had their marching orders, every department, to try to integrate, right? Because as you're building this platform together, you have to be able to, roll up financials, right? We would try to close our books within 10 days, right? And so we had to go in and we had to change accounting platforms, change people out, and, say, hey, this is how you're going to account for it, et cetera. Because if you can't consolidate your books, you can't report to your debt holders and everything else, right? And so, again, change has to happen. You have to push it. We focused on making sure that we would keep decentralized decision making. So, for example, my division presidents, they could decide who to hire, who to fire, how many people to hire. I wasn't trying to control their hiring. They could decide, a lot of their pay structures. We would try to get some consistency on, Salesforce comp and things like that. But they had a lot of decisions like, hey, you want to go get a different facility? Okay, go figure it out, right? And then bring it to us for final sign off, right? But the lease had to be negotiated centrally because we needed certain clauses in our leases for our debt covenants, right? So there were certain things I have to explain. We need to do this consistently on integration in order for the whole thing to win. So these are the guardrails here, but you got an open playing field here. So we're going to give you a lot of decision autonomy out in the field on these things, but on some of these things, there's no autonomy, right?
So where do you usually get the most resistance or the most headache?
It depends on my function. Usually HR. HR is usually the worst, and a centralized. If you don't have a HR person that understands decentralized, HR tries to make centralized decisions because they get full of themselves, and HR usually has been oftentimes the downfall of a lot of companies. And when you look at all the studies on acquisition integration, the number one failure of acquired companies is losing the sales force. Okay. And what chases away the sales force? HR. They like to screw with the compensation. They like to screw with the rules and regulations, et cetera. And they chase the sales force away.
Yeah, 100%. I can attest to that. So now in terms of like that first year, as you bring in that entity, what is the thing that you're watching for, to say, okay, we're successful in this integration. We don't have to go back in and do more work.
I mean, there was just, my whole team, I mean, we had, we would use, red, yellow, green charts, right? On everything. So there was a big spreadsheet and you had, 12 functions, each had their own tab. Here's the steps, here's the dates, and there was an integration leader on that, and boom, everybody's reporting, how we doing, what's open on the integration checklist that has to be done yet or not, right? Is it done? Is it on plan? And so, it was just a process like anything else, was just very detailed, and everybody had their marching orders of, hey, this was the integration plan you signed up for, let's get it done, right? No, issues came up and everything else, but ultimately the test on the integration is, did your people stay? Were they excited? And did revenue grow? Right. And if you got those three right, everything else could be dealt with, because growth motivates everybody. You name it, growth motivates everybody. If you're growing, growth covers all your other sins, right? If you're not growing, you're in trouble. Okay. So it's, you focus on that top line from the start. A lot of people get focused on the cost and they're going to save their way to success. That is just a problem, right? You want to drive, you bought this company because it's growing. Okay. And if you're not focused on growth and you're focused on saving 2 cents on the cell phone bill, you're screwed up.
Yeah. And have you done multiple integrations at the same time?
Oh yeah. I've acquired multiple companies and all in the same quarter. I've acquired companies on the same day,
And do you have dedicated, so the integration team is a dedicated team that's separate from the, operation?
Well, I might, the BD guy who led the acquisition, right?
Yeah.
Was responsible for monitoring the integration.
Okay.
They had to eat their own cooking. Right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they had to make sure that they acquired and followed through at the same time they had the next deal going. Okay. But then each, the CFO, the CIO, the head of HR, the head of the legal counsel, they all had their own task. And, we'd had to check in on the integration along the way. Right.
Got it. And when you were doing this last one, was that the same industry or multiple different industries?
Same industry.
Same industry. Okay. Got it. So it's a little bit lot easier than.
Oh, a lot easier. Yeah. Well, that's why private equity backed me. They're like, okay, wait, you've done this before in this vertical.
Yeah.
And some of the people are the same. Like, I brought my CFO back. I brought my HR director back. Okay. That made it easier. Made it easier to sell and raise the equity.
And you were acquiring at what multiple?
5 to 7 times.
Okay. And then your pro forma at exit, what's the multiple at the exit?
Yeah, you're targeting 7 or 8, but Blackstone way overpaid, so that was great. They went double digits on us, which was wonderful. They were stupid.
Nice. Okay. What year was that?
2021.
Wow, good timing. That 21, 22 is such a good window. We had Ben Surdy last week. He sold his restoration business for like 13 times.
Yeah.
22. It was just amazing. But one thing about the integration that you mentioned, the private equity company that bought him, they changed his operating system. They changed his software, his accounting system. So he literally couldn't run the business because all his KPIs, all his dashboard was gone.
Yep.
And he just didn't know how to run it anymore.
Yeah.
And he even though he had rolled in money into the business, he put in 10 million into the larger entity, he couldn't stay because he just couldn't run it.
Yeah.
It was just too frustrating for him.
Oh, I've seen that happen. I've seen people jam SAP down people's throats, and then they're like, this just takes more overhead to run. Why would we do this?
Yeah, it's nuts. Andrew, you had a question?
Yeah. So, Mark, I haven't transacted yet. What questions should I be asking you, or should we be asking you that we haven't asked yet?
I mean, first of all, I think you got to pick your industry and then really interview people in your industry. Like, hey, if you're buying a plumbing company, right? Go interview 5 guys that run plumbing companies and say, what questions would you ask? What would you look at, et cetera, right? It's the operators in this industry that are the smartest, right? I can tell you that in the home services industry, I have attempted over time to take really smart MBAs and have them run these businesses. And in a lot of cases, it's the guys from the industry that have been doing it for 20 years that are way smarter, that know how to make margin, right? And so the guys that have been doing this, they've kind of seen it a gazillion times. They kind of go, hey, you can't run with this much inventory, or you can't run with, need more inventory than this. You can't let this guy hold you up on this. The vendor can do better than that. And they understand how to, tweak everything from, hey, if I go to this vendor and I negotiate this deal, I can tie it to this deal and I can put the supply chain together. And they understand how everybody in the industry works, from suppliers on forward, versus just banging out the supplier for lower price. They figure out how to get more value out of the supplier, okay? Not necessarily at the lowest price. And in turn, that supplier helps them drive more business to their business. And so the guys in the industry, they go to the guys in the industry. They're just,
That's super interesting. And Jay, I hope you don't feel like I'm revealing too much.
No, good.
But so I run a wealth management firm, and Jay and I have been looking in the financial services industry as a place to make some acquisitions.
Sure.
I'm sure this isn't going to be a shock to everyone on the call. The people in the financial services industry have no effing clue what you're talking about there. They deal with financial products.
right.
They're not talking about the sorts of things you're talking about how do you drive profitability,
Right.
ever. And I've been in the industry for 20 years. My business partners don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
An issue. But so my question to you, the reason I'm saying this is that an opportunity for guys like myself and Jay to go in there and focus on those things, or not? Or is it too messy?
It is. The first question you got to ask, though, is what's your exit, right? This is the only question the private equity guys, when they look at a deal, the first thing they get a pitch book is, if I buy this business, can I sell it?
Oh yeah, we can sell this.
But you can sell it if you keep the advisors, if you do these things. So that's where it is.
Interesting.
So-
Yeah, interesting.
So what industries are you seeing out there that are, big enough, market, still fractional, or there's still acquisition at the higher EBITDA number, and that's still an opportunity right now?
Yeah. I think you have to find the niches, right? Like, for example, plumbing services, HVAC services. If you build up the right company, there's guys that are paying double-digit EBITDA multiples for those businesses, right? Whereas if you go to a flooring contractor, there's not a good exit, right? So you have to look at where what are the exits out there for each little niche. Which distribution. You can always find somebody, but a lot of them, like, hey, who's paying what for what exits, and understand what's going on there. And you have to dig into the individual little niche, whether it's home inspections, where's the fragmentation? Is it an industry that is private equity is interested in at scale? And if there is, then there's a history of it, but, don't go acquire the painter, right? Because no private equity guys are buying painting companies, right? It's just pure labor. They're not buying guys that are installing drywall, right? Don't go do that. The failure rate of private equity guys buying drywall installation companies is like 100%, right?
Oh, wow.
So figure that out. So, hey guys, I have a CEO peer group that I lead at this time. So I got to jump to my next call.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I appreciate it and glad to help, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Take care.